Okay, yeah, so welcome everybody. Like Hanan said, I'm Chris Bialik. I'm from Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and we're here today to talk to you about sustainable balcony gardening. So, when you're our balcony on a balcony garden, there are some things to consider compared to if you were to be gardening in, on a flat ground into the soil, and that they do have their own microclimate, and every balcony will be slightly different than the one that might be above a floor or below a floor, or even just around the corner from them. So things like temperature. So if you are on a south-facing balcony or a south-facing area, you're going to be getting a lot more sunlight than one that's facing north. So your temperatures are going to be significantly more than somebody that's going to get less sun, even on an east or west-facing balcony. You're going to be getting a lot more sunlight than somebody that's maybe planting on the ground as well. They're not going to be getting that shade from, fences or from a building. Or maybe you are getting more if you're in a highly urban area where you aren't going to be able to get as much sunlight because you're getting blocked, or maybe you're in a north-facing apartment where you're not getting as much sun until right in the middle of the summer. Wind exposure is another big one. So on the ground, you have all of the plants and fences and everything else that might be blocking the wind that's moving through. If you are on a balcony, you would probably notice that it's a lot more windy. Think of like an open parking lot area. You're going to get a lot more wind coming through, and you can actually lose some soil if your plants aren't kept moist. Drainage is another really important one. So you want to make sure that your roots aren't going to be getting too wet. So you need drainage, but if you have your pots draining onto your balcony themselves, you could have water overflowing and onto the balcony below you, and I'm sure your neighbors probably won't like that. And as well, overwintering is another big concern. As your plants are growing, they're not going to be able to survive over winter if you leave them in a pot outside, depending on what type they are, especially if they are, a newer plant. And if you're planting into pots, they will freeze a lot quicker than the soil will. So if you go through a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, it can actually, well, for one, break the pot. It could push the soil right out of the pot as it freezes, and it can kill your plant. So you need to really make sure that you're keeping that in mind as well. So again, another kind of little thought exercise. Think about how much sun your balcony or patio space or garden area will get daily. So if you get 6 hours or more, that is considered full sun. So that's going to be kind of limiting sort of what plants you're going to want to put there. So some plants like a lot of sun. They like to be, right in the open, taking in a lot of sunlight. They grow really quick, and they are kind of made to be able to do that without burning. Some that might want maybe have part shade, which is 3 to 6 hours. So you may, or maybe on like an east or a west facing balcony. So either in the morning or in the later afternoon, you get a little bit of sun before you get blocked out. So that's going to, again, change what plants you're going to have. Or maybe you're on a north facing balcony where you have a lot of shade. So you're less than 3 hours. And that's, again, going to change what plants you're planting. And many seed packets will actually say what kind of sun or amount of sun they do like. So think if 6 hours or more is full sun, 3 to 6 is partial shade, and 3 hours or less is shade. And there are a wide variety of different plants that will grow in all of these conditions. Because just think like in a normal area, if you're in a big open meadow, that would be full sun for those plants. If you're on like an edge of a habitat where they're maybe right on the edge of a forest, you're going to get some of that limiting amount of shade. And then there are all sorts of plants that like to grow under trees. So those would be those shade plants. So what can be planted on a balcony? All sorts of different things. Like I said, annuals and non-native perennials. So these, general ones that you're going to get from a garden store or from, one of those places. You can grow many of those on your balcony. Tropicals are another one that people might not think of. But again, if you're on a south-facing balcony, you're going to get a lot of sunlight. So you can potentially grow tropicals or like fruit trees as well. You just need to remember a lot of those will need to come in kind of over winter. Vegetables and herbs are another one. So I mentioned providing a source of food. Balcony gardens are great for that as well. And in particular for me, as a conservation authority, we try and encourage people to plant native plants, which many of these are perennials. So you kind of plant them and then forget about them. All right. So that's kind of looking at our plant selection. Now we're going to take a look at container selection, what you want to put these plants into, because not all containers are created equal. There are a wide variety of different materials you can find, terracotta, plastic, metal, wood, and many of these will have different conditions and different ways that they'll affect our plants. And you can find these in a wide variety of different sizes. Many of them will have different drainage conditions, and like I mentioned, a wide variety of different compositions as well. Okay, so when you're looking at watering and maintenance, the soil is going to be extremely important to what you're putting your plants into. And in fact, you actually want to start with a potting mix, not soil. Um, so if you're putting it into soil, like you would find outside in the ground, it can actually compact really easily in pots, and it'll end up almost like a concrete, which your roots won't be able to grow through. Whereas a potting mix will have a lot more spaces, a lot more bounce to it, I guess. So it gives it room to kind of move through over multiple years. So you want to make sure that you are adding nutrients. So as your plants are growing, they're taking nutrients out of the soil. So, you might think of using like a fertilizer, but you can also use organic materials. So things like compost, you can raise backyard worms or balcony worms, wood chips, rice hulls. These are all great ways of adding kind of organic material. So if you have like a little green bin, or as you're cutting up your vegetables for making dinner, you can kind of set them off to the side and use that organic material to provide more for your gardens. You can even put in things like eggshells as well as a great source of calcium for plants like tomatoes. You're going to want to make sure that you're having proper drainage. So things like perlite or vermiculite, sand, pebbles, these are a great way to they have a little bit larger size to them and allow the water to drain through a little bit easier. So perlite and vermiculite are little additives that you can add in. You can usually find them at garden centers. Like vermiculite is those little white pieces that you can see in a lot of the potting mixes, and they're just very porous and allow it to absorb water. And same thing with perlite as well. And you can also add things that'll help retain moisture. So you can add coir, which is actually just like shredded coconut husks. You can find it and add it on top of the pot or on top of the soil, which will just kind of hold that moisture in place. It stops it from drying out as easily from the sun and from the wind. All right, so when we're looking at winterizing our plants, so at the end of the growing season, you need to make sure that, you harvest your food. So you make sure that, if you planted food, you're getting that food out of it. Excuse me, making sure you're removing diseased plants. So if you are seeing spots and insects or other things that are moving onto some of your plants, making sure that you're removing those out of your garden is really important so that they're not going to be affecting all of the rest of them next year. So you might not think of it, but making sure that even after you've removed all of those, the food, that you're watering well into the fall. Even, as the temperatures are starting to decrease, they are still more than enough that, with the wind and the sunlight, they are going to be still drying out really quite quickly. So making sure that you are watering it well into the fall season and that they're able to get that moisture that they need so that hopefully, especially for perennials, they'll be able to grow up easier next spring. If you have been fertilizing them, making sure that you stop that fertilizing kind of mid to late summer so that you're not seeing that growth going well into the fall, and that you're not, putting nutrients into the soil that isn't actually needed. All right, so that's kind of a lot of the gardening sort of portion of it. Next, we're just going to take a look quickly at some of the building rules and regulations you might face if you are in a condo or an apartment building. So if you are in some of these areas, you need to keep in mind that you aren't breaking the rules. It's not worth getting fined or potentially kicked out of your apartment because you want to build a garden. So making sure that you are following some of these guidelines as well. So again, it'll range from building to building and from place to place, but many of them will have things like no feeding or housing birds. So you probably might not be able to put up like a bird feeder or a little bird house. So again, keeping that in mind, many of them will say you can't place it outside of the windowsills or on balcony railings. That's really just to make sure that it's safe for people that are below you, especially for some of those like flimsier ones, or you get a gust of wind, you don't want your pot to fall off and hurt somebody below or smash below. So making sure that when they are planted, that they are actually on the ground of on the flat part of your balcony. And making sure that you're also checking things like height and placement restrictions for trellises. Maybe you can build one that's 6 feet, but you can't build one that's 7 feet. So making sure that you're understanding kind of what these conditions or what rules are in place for what might be allowed and not allowed.